As we know, Henry Ford revolutionized the auto industry. However, I'm not here to talk about Henry Ford. 22 years after the last Model T left the assembly line, Lee Iacocca was hired into the Ford Motor Company. Lee Iacocca's failures and triumphs helped shape the auto industry as we know it today, and it's very important to be mindful of these failures and triumphs. From Ford to Chrysler and Mustang to Grand Caravan, Lee Iacocca's prowess continues to motivate the industry. I've always been fascinated in the auto industry ever since I can remember. I've constantly watched and listened to many documentaries as well as did a lot of internet research. For my main points, I will let you know who is Lee Iacocca. Then I will talk about Lee Iacocca at the Ford Motor Company. And then lastly, I will talk about how Lee Iacocca saved Chrysler from bankruptcy. But first, many of you are wondering, who is Lee Iacocca? Well, first thing I can tell you, Lee Iacocca is not from Michigan. He was an Italian-born native, Italian-born immigrant from Pennsylvania, born in 1924. As biography.com states, Lee Iacocca quoted, "I was raised to give back, born to immigrants, and was fortunate to become successful." And on top of that, Iacocca's plan wasn't originally engineering. He wanted to join the military in World War II, but his health said otherwise. As biography.com stated, Iacocca had rheumatic fever, which deemed him unfit for the military. With this in mind, Lee Iacocca attended Lehigh University and became an engineer major and got a job at the Ford Motor Company. And now, I will discuss about Iacocca and the Ford Motor Company. Iacocca was one of Ford's brightest pupils. As stated by the article Henry Ford II Fires Lee Iacocca from History.com, Iacocca moved quickly through the ranks. He was an engineer and switched to sales, in which he excelled at. And from the same article, it states that in 1960, Lee Iacocca was appointed the vice president and general manager of the Ford Company's largest marketing arm. However, in 1962, Ford was having a down year, and Iacocca was able to convince that the answer was a sports car. However, with the Mustang in development and 2 years away from being released, their quickest plan to get this was purchasing Ferrari. However, Ferrari ends up selling the company to Fiat instead of Ford. And so Ford, in response, hires AVG, or Advanced Vehicle Group, in Dearborn. However, the vehicles they made were unstable and highly unreliable, especially on the brakes. The Mustang releases in 1964, and as represented in the article Henry Ford II Fires Lee Iacocca, the Mustang put Lee Iacocca on the covers of Times and Newsweek magazines the same week that the Mustang first came out. However, in 1964 and 1965, with Lee Iacocca convincing Henry Ford II to hire Carroll Shelby, as quoted by Chuck Tennant at Ford's, in 1966, Ford humiliated Ferrari and the Italian Stallions, winning with all first, second, and third place vehicles being Ford's, with Ferrari having no vehicles completing the race. However, after this, shortly after, Henry Ford II fired Lee Iacocca, as represented by History.com. In December 1970, Iacocca was appointed president of the company, but with brusque, unorthodox styles soon brought him into conflict with his boss. Iacocca tried finding support, which gave Ford the reason to fire him. Ford II stated, as represented by History.com, "Sometimes you just don't like somebody." But quickly, with quickly after he got fired from the Ford Motor Company, he got hired as the president of Chrysler. By 1979, Chrysler was facing twin blows of economic hardship from both the spiking interest rates as well as the oil crisis. Iacocca went and asked the government for $1.5 billion in loan guarantees. As the current owner of Chrysler has stated in an interview with Reuters' Bill Trott, people saw him in the trenches, pounding the halls of Congress. Dealers were with him. He worked his head off day and night. Everyone involved with Chrysler knew it. Finally, the government gave in and gave Lee Iacocca the loans to help fix Chrysler. With this money, he was able to make smaller and more fuel-efficient cars to face the Japanese. These cars were also known as K cars. And from in the same article, in the article, Lee Iacocca, auto executive who saved Chrysler from bankruptcy, dies at 94, as presented by Reuters. Lee Iacocca would stay in his advertisement for these cars, barking, "If you can find a better car, then buy it." But with these new fuel-efficient cars, Chrysler was quickly able to pay the loan 7 years early, as presented by the New York Times in 1983. However, shortly after paying off these loans, Chrysler gets stuck in another rut. From 1990 to 1991, Chrysler lost $800 million. But in 1992, the 1992 Jeep Grand Cherokee and Chrysler LH sedans led Chrysler to a $732 million profit. After 1992 and Chrysler making profit again, Lee Iacocca retired. First, I let you guys know who is Lee Iacocca. Then I let you guys know about Lee Iacocca and the Ford Motor Company. And lastly, I let you guys know about Lee Iacocca saving the Chrysler Corporation. From Ford to Chrysler and Mustang to Grand Caravan, Lee Iacocca's prowess continues to motivate the industry. In conclusion, Lee Iacocca, yes, is no Henry Ford. But without his expertise, we wouldn't have vehicles we have today, such as the Mustang, nor would we have the big three pushing the industry forward. Thank you.